Hello. Is anyone else feeling a little bit angry and a little bit inspired right now? I hope you enjoyed the film. Over the next few minutes, we're going to learn and discuss the issues that this film raised with the Q&A. At the JCC, we are committed to tackling tough, hard issues as a community in an environment of civility and respect. We ask you to keep this in mind as we engage in our discussion. And it gives me great honor to welcome our panelists. We have the directors, Durrance and Barak Goodman. We also have the executive director of Common Cause New York, Susan Lerner. And our moderator, the Marlene Meyerson JCC's social justice activist in residence, Ruth Messenger.
Thank you, Cheryl. I am speechless, and the people in this auditorium know I'm rarely speechless. That was the most incredible lesson in democracy. I know the story is a lesson in democracy, but you guys told it, so I feel as if I've been in an advanced graduate course for the last hour. So can you talk to us a little bit, Chris and Barak, about how you decided to do it, how you went at it, and in the process, can somebody tell me what Katie is doing now?
Why don't I do the first and you do the second? This began when, around 2016, I read a book called Rat Fucked by a guy named David Daley, who you see in the film. And this was an amazing book. It's one of those pieces of journalism that are unforgettable, sort of, our modern day Jungle or whatever. When it's one of these great eye-opening moments for me as a journalist reading this book. I'd never heard of gerrymandering, really. And he told the whole story of Project Red Map and other things, and I just felt this has to be made into a film. It just has to be explored in documentary form. And so I called David, and we quickly came to an agreement to pursue this. And then shortly thereafter, I brought it up with an extraordinary woman named Diane Wireman, who's the head of Participant Media, which is, you may know them as the producers of Inconvenient Truth and The Cove and every major documentary that you've heard of. And she immediately saw the importance of the subject and the importance of the film and funded it, and we were off and running. And we were very lucky early on to find Katie. The minute you meet Katie, you feel like this is one of those characters that you just don't run across very often. We, at that point, had no idea. That meeting in the church was their first time together in person. They'd met virtually on the little Facebook group, but they'd never met in person. So we were there very early. No idea what would happen. All along, we sort of felt this was like everybody else, this was unlikely to succeed, and you know the rest. So what's Katie doing now?
Well, and the other thing to remember about her is she had a full-time job. she was, I really don't know how she did it, how she inspired so many people and brought them all together, but with such wisdom for a total neophyte politically. And it was funny when we were in a screening recently in Michigan, and it's a roundabout way of asking what people want Katie to do next. I think one person yelled out, "Katie for president." So I don't know if that's in her future or not, but there's something, she's just special, truly special person. So she's now taken a break from Voters Not Politicians. Nancy Wang, who is the Michigan law professor, who you see in the film, is now running the organization, and it's valiantly fighting off various efforts by Republicans in the state and out of the state to try and hobble the independent commission in any way they can, deny it funding, deny the Secretary of State funding, everything they can do, and that's still rumbling slowly through the courts. But the group is confident, utterly confident, that they're going to be ready for 2021. I think not this next election, but the one after, which was always the plan. And meanwhile, Katie is setting up a national organization, and what she wants to do is bring everyone together and try and act as a catalyst for change, for whatever change local communities want. So she's on this widespread listening tour, traveling the country and trying to get the feel for the pulse in many states, communities, counties, and foment change. And we hope that she succeeds, and whatever she does, it's sure to be amazing.
Thank you. A question to each of you. Tell us a little bit about your own backgrounds that led you to decide that this was what you wanted to throw your energy into and raise money for.
Well, we're documentary filmmakers and have been for a very long time. After 2016, after the election, both Chris and I have made lots of films on history, on politics, on current events, but I felt a calling, I think a lot of filmmakers did, to make something that was about the political situation, something that was trying to get underneath the noise and understand how we got where we are, what has happened to this country to, find ourselves in this predicament. And I felt in reading David's book that this was an insight into the underlying tectonics of our democracy, what it is that is driving this polarization, this tribalism, this dysfunctionality, both at the state and national levels. It was a true insight into that I hadn't read. So I jettisoned a lot of other projects and really thought this was what I wanted to do, something meaningful, something important, something about democracy. I still feel, we feel that we want to continue in that vein. So it was a pretty easy choice for me. It was a harder film to get made, but thanks to Diane Weyerman and others, we were able to do it.
And Chris?
I have to say that both of us feel very lucky to get to do what we do. It really is one of the best jobs in the world. But when you get to do something that not only is fun, is stimulating, it exercises your creative muscles as well, but when you get to do all of that and then do something that feels consequential, that you hope will be consequential, you hope will touch people, that really just takes it to another level. So when this opportunity came up, and it wasn't easy, it's not easy getting this kind of film made. Diane was a great inspiration, but it still took a lot of work, a lot of hustling. Barak did an amazing job just pulling in the money that was needed to actually make the film that we wanted to make. And when it happened, it was just a pure joy, frankly. But thank you all also for coming out. It's a snowy night, and what makes it? We could make it and no one could see it. But what makes it is people feeling like they do want to see it, they are interested, they do want to make a difference. And like the people in Michigan, we hope that all of you spread the word, and that the film does find an audience.
Here, and I just want to say one other quick thing. This film would not have been made but for a gentleman in New York, a hedge fund manager, a very wealthy man, and we tend to think of them in certain ways, but he is passionate about this issue and came forward with half the funds to make it. We wouldn't have been able to make it. His name is William von Mufflin, fantastic human being, modest, quiet man, but committed person.
Okay, I'm going to get to all of you and to Susan in a minute, but I have one or two more questions. What I know about film is what I see on the screen, but I think that you did, in addition to all of the great scenes in Michigan and Wisconsin, you did an extraordinary job with the graphics and the amount of text that you had to put in. And I just want to, I don't know if you want to say anything about it, I just want to congratulate. It really was like reading the core sentence each time about the decisions and getting a lot of information that you couldn't have gotten with just people campaigning.
Well, all I'll say is that you put your finger on probably the hardest part of this film was balancing and kind of understanding how much information people needed to understand this very complex issue, but not too much. We didn't want it to be a textbook that you're reading, but on the other hand, we had to parcel out some critical information. So it was very much a sort of learning as we go kind of thing. We had some great graphic artists helping us.
Yeah, the film went through lots of iterations. What you've seen is the 20th, 30th version of it. Katie was not a primary figure at the top of the film for a long time, which seems hard to believe now when watching it, and it seems so natural. But I would credit Diane again at participant, and then the editor that we got to work with, Seth Bomsey, who are just fantastic partners and fantastic storytellers who could just separate themselves from us being immersed in the story and the characters and just say, no, this is what it needs, and just shut up now, we'll do it.
So one other comment from me, which is, first of all, I think the explanation and the graphics for showing gerrymandering were like brilliant, and they should be in every textbook. And also, I just want to congratulate you on starting it with the Flint, Michigan story, because people don't understand why all of this stuff matters so much, and just making that connection in the opening few minutes, I think was really powerful. The JCC, as Center for Social Responsibility, has done lots of work with Susan in our relatively new life, and worked closely with Susan and Common Cause New York last year on issues that sort of pale a little bit in the face of this, but a dramatic effort that was successful called Let New York Vote. So why don't you tell us both your response to the film and bring people up to date on what we did last year and what we need to do next?
Happy to. Well, first of all, thank you, because those of us who have been working on redistricting and threats to democracy need tools like this film to lay out the story, to really help bring people to an understanding of what it is we're fighting. And, as I was watching the conclusion of the film, it's absolutely enraging that the U.S. Supreme Court, in our litigation, Common Cause, brought a litigation based on the gerrymandering in North Carolina that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And we took the Whitford case, and we took very seriously what the Supreme Court had decided there. And we went out and we brought a case that was directed exactly to what the Supreme Court said had been the problem in Whitford. We had individual plaintiffs from every single congressional district in North Carolina. We had the strongest possible case, and in essence, the Supreme Court just ducked. They said, this is impossible for a court to decide. Well, it's not impossible for a court to decide, because we also simultaneously brought a lawsuit in North Carolina in the state court. And guess what? The state Supreme Court in North Carolina was perfectly able to recognize political gerrymandering and to say that it was unconstitutional under the state constitution. So that's what we've turned to in terms of our legal litigation strategy, is working in the states under state constitutions, because unlike the federal constitution, virtually every single state constitution has a right to vote. And so we're able to use that. But it's tremendously exciting to see citizen activists like Katie spring up. And I know my colleagues who work on redistricting in Common Cause were in touch with the Michigan folks and providing support in the background. We've been working for years in Florida and in Ohio to get citizen initiatives passed. But here in New York, we don't have that tool. So we need to work with our legislators. We're about to begin the cycle of redistricting here. Once the census is finished this year, it takes about a year for the data to come down. So in the middle of 2021, the census data will come down, hopefully with the identification of where incarcerated people are to be found, so that we can reallocate them back to their place of last residence. And then we have a new redistricting process, which is going to take place, that we are going to have to watch like hawks, because it's not an independent redistricting commission. And every time we speak to people in Albany about that, they're like, oh, I don't know, how could you have that? Well, Michigan has it now. California is the example. Last cycle, the Independent Redistricting Commission, Citizens Commission in California, drew fair lines. And California was able to really change their congressional delegation and to have fair representation. So the courts can do it, the people can do it, and we have to get our elected representatives to do it. At Let New York Vote last year, we were able to pass a package of reforms.
Great reforms.
Making New York the 38th state for early voting. And now here in New York City, we all need to work to be sure that we are getting enough and the right locations for early voting, because we are going to have 3 early voting periods. We're in the midst of passing automatic voter registration in Albany. The first day, the state Senate went back into session and passed voting reforms, 2 really significant ones, automatic voter registration and requiring that there be polling places on college campuses and universities where you have a larger number of students, because that's been a voter suppression problem across the country and in our state.
Right, so just a couple of notes from me. First of all, that last point, I know the situation, particularly in the University of Illinois, but there are a variety of tactics used to prevent students from being active participants in voting. And so I would just give a shout out to the Andrew Goodman Foundation. Everybody in this audience knows that Andrew Goodman was a West Sider who was murdered in Mississippi. David Goodman, his brother, who runs the Andrew Goodman Foundation. All their work is on what needs to be done to stop the efforts at voter suppression on college and university campuses across the country. And so we will be telling you about that. I want to say, Susan said what she's going to put in motion once the census numbers are in. The Center for Social Responsibility will be working with Common Cause on that. But first, we need all of your help in working on the census.
Absolutely essential.
If we do not count every person in New York in various districts, we stand at risk to lose both a congressional representative, total numbers of congressional representatives, and federal dollars that come into New York. So that's the first critical organizing effort. I want to go to the audience, but just say a word first about distribution. What do people do to get this film?
The film is about to come out in theaters. Magnolia is distributing it. We're so grateful to Magnolia for that. It's going to have a big New York premiere, LA premiere, and go on from there. So we're thrilled. That's going to be March 13th.
Yeah, it's March 13th, and then I think Ali numbered quite a few states as well. I think Michigan and 4 or 5 states, and hopefully people come.
Certainly be in Michigan. Should bring out the.
Tell your friends, because I'm told that opening weekend is really important. So get your friends to come out and see the film.
Okay, questions from people. Up there first, if you can run that far. We put our volunteers in track shoes.
Don't worry, I get paid.
Thank you for coming out. It was quite enraging and eye-opening. Anything to help with? Is there any suggestion you would suggest to get involved with, like, stopping voter ID laws? Since I've felt very passionate, very frustrated about that, especially due to what happened.
Voter ID is a really problematic situation because it really is an excuse for voter suppression. But those of us in the voting rights world know that to a certain degree we've lost the public relations battle. People think that voter ID is okay. So the battle has shifted to being sure that the requirement for voter ID is not restrictive, that it's expansive. So mostly, to be honest, there are 2 things. One, the legal battles continue to expand from very restrictive requirements. But the other thing is actually working with people in the states that have these terrible restrictions to be sure that those who can get the IDs that are necessary, and there's some people who just can't for various reasons, having to do with an absence of birth certificates from home births and other problems. But there are various organizations that are working on the ground to be sure that people know about voter ID and that they have the necessary documentation. So the NAACP LDF, a Legal Defense Fund, is one of the organizations that does that. The NAACP in all of the locations, and also the League of Women Voters does a lot of that kind of work. And we at Common Cause put out the information in every single state. So I don't have a automatic answer to go here and then you get hooked in. But I can do some research for you and let you know who is accepting volunteers.
And that will come to the Center for Social Responsibility, and you will all get an email because we have your emails. So any film you saw, you will get an email from us telling you how you can follow up and what you can do to be active, because social justice is not a spectator sport. Yes.
Do I need a microphone? Yes, ma'am. Wait,
Yes.
wait. I'm coming.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to see her run a lot. You know, she's so good at it.
Who is it? Who's supposed to talk? Who got called up?
Sorry, I'm at the other end of the room.
Thank you for your wonderful film. It was very motivating and very well put together.
It's not on.
Can you hear me?
No.
I can speak it loudly.
It's okay. We have other mics. There's other mics in the thing, Cheryl.
Okay, oops, there we go. Yes, thank you so much for your wonderful film. It was very motivating and very well put together step by step. And as an activist myself, I was on the Women's March today.
Thank you.
And thank you for the film. And Monday, I'm a volunteer at the JCC for voter registration because I felt that was so important. So my question is, I know there's nothing immediately, but is there anything that you can recommend that I can tell the people at the voter registration table, give them an incentive from the motivation you've given me from the film, that I can tell them or recommend what we can do now?
Really what we can do now is exactly that, is to get as many people registered as possible.
Yeah.
And what you need to know is that the date by which people can change their party enrollment in New York has been improved. Previously, if you wanted to change your party enrollment, let's say you were one of the hundreds of thousands of people who was not enrolled in a party, but you decided you wanted to vote in a party primary, you had to change your party registration in the October in the year before the primary, which is nuts and made us crazy, and resulted in a huge number of people, you may remember, in the spring of 2016 being absolutely enraged that they were unable to vote in the Democratic and in the Republican primary. So we've been fighting with the legislature for 4 years, for 3.5 years, and last session we actually got them to change it so that it is now in the same calendar year as the primary. I have no explanation for why we can't get it to be just coterminous with the registration deadline, but it's been impossible. So if there are people who want to vote in the primary, they need to be sure they are registered in the party that they want to vote in as of, are you ready? Valentine's Day. They picked Valentine's Day. So as one of my WAG friends said, declare your love for your political party on Valentine's Day. So if people say, oh, I'm registered, tell them to be sure to check their registration. I think it's really important that everybody get online and check your registration in advance of any election, 30 days before any election you're planning to vote in. So if for some reason your registration has mysteriously disappeared, and we've brought 2 lawsuits at Common Cause New York about this, you have time to fix it. Or if you are mysteriously removed from your party, which is a problem we're seeing with people whose registration has changed because they changed their address through the DMV, the board is treating that as an entirely new registration, and since you're not filling out the full form, they're taking people out of their political parties, which because of this crazy deadline is a real problem. So check your registration. When people say, oh, I'm registered already, remind them, at your current address, and you know what? Just go online and double check. For people who are like, I don't want to register, right? I don't want to encourage them. My vote doesn't matter. The truth of the matter is your vote matters incredibly. We have had races decided in this state, really important races that change the balance of power in the city council, in the legislature, with as few as 100 votes or less.
Okay, so first of all, again, I want to make sure you all see all the connections here. The film was about gerrymandering and district drawing, but those states that kept popping up in that great graphic that have now turned Republican, they're going to do everything. They're not only going to keep drawing lines and fighting for partisan gerrymandering, but they're going to look for voter suppression and changing voter ID. So all of these issues work across the line. I'm going to tell you two very fast stories. First of all, as your elected representative, I went through 2 censuses and redistricting in the so-called clean New York City, and I will tell you that it doesn't matter what the commission was. At those occasions, the commission's appointed by elected officials. When the commission had their maps ready, they called in every elected official privately and said, "This is your district. What changes do you want to make?" And people took their opponents out of the district. They forget about changing it for partisan power. They just said, take these 2 blocks where the person who I think is going to challenge me lives and take her out of the district. And all of that was done at the whim of the elected officials. And since we all could use some good news stories, I supported this year, I support a lot of people running for elected office across the country. I supported a young Latina woman, my husband and I, and my daughter in Boston, who was running for the Boston City Council. Her name is Julia Mejia. And there was a close election for the 4th at-large council seat in Boston. And on November 5th, the vote was so close that a recount was ordered. The recount was held over 3 weeks, and the week after Thanksgiving, I got a call from my daughter, who'd been a poll watcher. Julia Mejia is now a city council member at large in Boston, first Afro-Latina, first time that the city council in Boston is majority women, and she won her election by 1 vote. True story.
It happens. It really does.
All right, last word from the filmmakers, and then Cheryl's going to go.
Well, I just want to just say one quick thing in response to your question. Voter suppression, in case you're just sort of, it's abstract, you're not sure of how important it is, this next presidential election could easily come down to the state of Wisconsin. I mean, probably will. And the state of Wisconsin is a razor-thin 50-50 state. And the last time I heard, there was a measure that's been passed and upheld so far to take more than 200,000 voters off the rolls
230,000.
because of discrepancies in their names on the voting rolls. You know much more.
Yeah. If they can't win at the ballot box, they're just going to eliminate
So
voters.
my point is support these organizations. I'm not just saying this because she happens to be sitting next to me. Common Cause, League of Women Voters, the people who are bringing lawsuits and fighting this on the ground need our support. And it's absolutely critical. The Campaign Legal Center, you can find these folks. They're fighting the fight in the courts. They're winning more than they're losing, and it's vital that we support them.
And one other thing, and I think we're having problems, surprisingly, in New York with this, is automatic voter registration. I mean, it's a total crime that people aren't just automatically registered when they turn 18, even earlier, 16, 17, some states do. And that, again, is a way of making it hard for young people to vote, making it hard for people to vote. And it should happen. The law was passed in New York. Was it passed in New York? Or it's now being slow-walked?
It's slow-walked. The state Senate has passed it. Call your assembly member and tell them you want automatic voter registration. The assembly needs to pass it now, this month.
And in other states. I mean, everywhere should have automatic voter registration. You go and you get your driver's license, you should be registered to vote. And just anything we can do to get people out to vote, increase turnout, because we want representatives to represent us. I mean, the reason why all the things we think are important are not being debated is because there's this disconnect, and we've got to fight that.
This is an idea that I have not heard from any other, I don't know if it's out there, so I want to suggest it. I think that states that are under Democratic control, in those states, the legislature and the governor should sign a law in which the state will make a contribution from the state's taxpayer funds to nonprofit groups in other states to help them register voters and make sure people have the proper IDs, et cetera. Is that idea out there? Is it possible?
I think that would be rather tough. I love it, but the truth of the matter is that you assume that things are okay in democratic states. Look how far behind we are in New York, okay? Pennsylvania, states where, as the filmmakers point out, the gerrymandering is done by both parties. What we need are citizen activists on the ground. And so, for instance, the person who asked about how can you help with voter ID, the willingness to go and volunteer time, support organizations is really the key. I don't think we're going to get one state sending money into another to tell it what to do. I think that's going to blow up.
We will give you lots of work to do. Cheryl Parker, head of the Center for Social Responsibility.
I want to thank all of you for an excellent, excellent conversation. Thank you to our audience. In the next day or so, you will receive an email from me with a number of ways that you can get involved, one of which is to take your friends and your family to see this great film on March 13th. Thanks again. We have films all weekend long. I hope you'll join us for more of them. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.